Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar talking about rebalancing the supply chain and other steps that we can take from an operational perspective to go beyond perhaps the financial SG&A and other steps that companies have taken to preserve cash and preserve the ability to resume normal operations as this pandemic situation resolves itself over time. Today, we're going to look at ways to go deeper. We're going to look at steps that we can take today to rebalance our factories, rebalance our supply chains, and also to tap into incentives that not only the federal incentives that we have today, but also state and municipal incentives that have been there all along that help us not only, we think of them often as opportunities when we want to move a location, but they're also available to help us keep jobs where they are. I think maybe kind of the last thought here is the cold truth is our companies will survive this situation. There might be a change in ownership though, and that's what we're trying to avoid here, and to maximize our options and flexibility to survive and thrive going forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel today. Very excited about this group. We've got a lot of experience and a lot of know-how and a lot of creative thought here in helping companies really thrive in difficult situations. And to start off with, I'd like to introduce Dave Kreidline. Dave is with Monroe Partners today. He is the consummate operating partner, in my humble opinion. And his role is often to come in very distressed situations, take charge, turn around, stabilize a company, and put it on a path to improvement, which clearly is a very relevant topic today. This is a time when calm but active heads prevail, and Dave brings that to the table. I'd also like to introduce Jason Hickey. Jason is the president and CEO of Hickey and Associates. They're a global leader in site location strategy, economic incentive advisory, workforce solutions, and by the way, they're active in 6 of the 7 different continents on this world. One way I think of it is they help their clients rethink their fixed costs based how to expand, how to contract when necessary, how to have the right infrastructure to serve your clients. As part of this, Jason and Mike, who I'm about to introduce, are experts at leveraging government incentives, make versus buy analysis, and really calculating the total cost of serving your customers. And I'd also like to introduce Mike Nolan. Mike Nolan is also with Hickey and Associates. And when I think of Mike, the other piece that he adds and brings a real passion to is when you think about the fixed costs, the infrastructure, the footprint of your company, evaluate that not only as you run the company today, but if you were running it with best practices. If you introduce lean concepts, effective inventory management control, effective supply chain and logistics, it's sometimes going to have a dramatic impact on the total footprint required. And myself, I'm Tim Van Meegum. I'm with the ProAction Group. We're an operational consulting firm that serves private equity. And one of the things that I love about working in private equity and in general with M&A, around M&A deals, is that the deal kind of creates an artificial point to rethink and to evaluate where we are as a company. Oftentimes when companies are growing and they're doing well, the idea of operational excellence, the idea of operational efficiency, or reevaluating where we are can slip through the cracks because we're focused on growth, we're focused on serving customers. And like that M&A deal, this COVID situation provides us an opportunity to rethink where we are and evaluate our opportunities to thrive going forward. So with that, I'm now going to turn this over to each of our panelists to provide some introductory thoughts on what we as business owners, sponsors, or C-level executives can do given our current situation. Dave, if you don't mind, I'll put you on the spot first.
Sure. Dave Kryline here. I appreciate it, everybody. So look, this is a unique time. I don't think any of us have been through anything like this, so we have to be flexible, have to be willing to move with the times. And look, we're all looking for an edge here to try and keep your businesses alive, keep your businesses going, continue profitability, and what do you have to do that? So my basic philosophy in all these things is revenues are usually falling in times like this, and you got to pick a floor where you think your revenues are going to be and get your cost structures in line with that floor. And then I would take an extra 20% off and figure out what you're going to do with that from a standpoint of how do you get your cost structures more in line. And then you got to start looking at your fixed cost structures because your supply chain maybe have too much fixed costs in it. So you have to take fixed costs out of your system, shutting down locations that aren't getting good, production, or shutting down facilities that are out of the way and aren't generating the efficiencies that you need or don't have the labor that you need. So you just got to be flexible in this time frame to get the right answer. And my basic philosophy in this is very simple. Move quickly, and move as fast as you possibly can, because waiting only burns liquidity. And the people who are going to be left standing at the end of the day are going to be the people who have liquidity at the end of this.
Amen. Thank you very much. Jason?
So much has been discussed nationally and internationally about assistance that governments are able to give short term. And I think the thing to remember, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to dig into this a bit deeper, Tim, is what's available today is so much more broader. If you need help retaining workers, creating new skills for those workers, and just making sure that your operations can succeed over the next quarter or year or more than that, there is an incredible amount of assistance available, not just on the federal level, which has gotten the most attention, but every state and many, many communities on the city and local level and county level, and you name it, have available opportunities to tap into. And those are there for companies that need help. And I think economic developers across the world are very focused now on ensuring that their incumbent businesses are going to be healthy today and into the future.
Very good. Thank you, Jason. Mike?
Thanks for having us on today, Tim. Just along with some of Jason's comments, we want to talk a little bit today about what some of those opportunities are, what those trigger events might be, and then some of the best practices that you should be thinking about for your portfolio companies, and how bringing an integrated approach from, starting from inside the four walls is where Tim specializes, and really understanding where are some of those areas that your business can improve to be able to surgically reduce those fixed costs. And then when you're making those moves, what are the programs that we could deploy that are going to help offset any of those investments you need to make? If you have to close a plant and you're going to have to relocate it to another facility that you have, well, what opportunities can you get for that? Because that location, that state, that municipality is going to look at that as new job creation. And are there any CapEx investments that are going to have to come along with that investment? And if so, what programs are there to help make that transition easier for you? Because you are making a recommitment, even though you're cutting heads or you're reducing a job count, you're still increasing a job count in another location. So what can we do to really help with that? And putting a fact-based process together where you have the right team, whether that's internal or bringing somebody in like yourself to be able to calculate that current versus future state and understanding what is the real impact to EBITDA, and putting that case together and just having all the tools at your disposal.
Very good. That might be a good place for us to start here, Jason. I'm going to toss the first question out to you, and maybe you could walk us through some examples of incentives that are available in helping us with worker retention and in general dealing with this volatile demand pattern that we're all dealing with today.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. Now, we all know, because there's been thousands and thousands of webinars on the COVID emergency relief that's offered by the federal government. So we're all very familiar about the Paycheck Protection Plan, as well as some other programs that are out there to help short-term, small, medium-sized businesses, and some of the challenges that private equity and family offices have had to try to capture some of those funds. And the Senate has announced this morning that there'll be an additional $300+ billion added to that PPP program, as well as assistance to local communities and states and hospitals and some other things. But outside of the program, such as SBA lending and others that have gotten so much attention, there are about 80,000 programs that we would generally call incentives that are across the U.S. in all 50 states and many, many local jurisdictions that include opportunities to help retain workers. And what's been lost is that those programs existed before the pandemic took hold and will exist far into the future. And those are there to capture immediately. Is that if you're at a place right now with your operations, either manufacturing, office, call center, you name it, if there's an opportunity to retain those workers over the long term, over not just over the temporary period, but over the next few years, well, then there's assistance for you. And some of that can be significant, and some of that can be received immediately. One of the common misnomers, Tim, is that certain incentives and credits get allocated over a series of years, and there's certainly programs like that. But a common misnomer is that you can absolutely receive those benefits sooner, and there's different strategies to deploy to see if that can come to bear. On top of programs on the county and city level, there are massive workforce and training programs available to help upskill your workforce, to help if your factory is shut down or certain lines have been mothballed, to get those back up and running. There's money for that. And then, of course, the federal government, through the Department of Labor and other entities and agencies that haven't been talked about so much, like EDA and USDA and others, there was about $4.5 billion added to those agencies just for economic development, just for businesses to get them back up and running and healthy. And so that was from late in March, and we're expecting in the future more opportunities to come along with future stimulus. But there are great programs. Missouri Works, the Illinois Edge program. There's a great program in Virginia that are all geared towards either capital investment without job growth and retention, or just holding on to the workers that you've got to be able to get some great benefits, not just tax breaks, but real capital injections that can help. And on top of it, as you're operating, there are utility companies and organizations and co-ops across the United States and beyond that can help with special rate riders and other related infrastructure that can help save 30%, 40% on your electricity costs. So there are, as I mentioned, there's over 80,000 programs out there that existed before all this started that are there for companies to capture. And we can't encourage organizations enough that those are out there, and that really the first ones at the gate are going to be able to benefit from those programs early on and sooner, and start to get the help that they need.
Jason, is there a rule of thumb in terms of, either how many jobs are at stake that you can either maintain or move or keep, or how much CapEx you have to spend before the evaluation of incentives becomes relevant?
It's a great question. We get that a lot. Is that where does the opportunity begin? We track in the front page of the newspapers the big deals that happen, the Amazon headquarters and the large manufacturing projects. But most incentives are given to smaller to medium-sized operations, and it doesn't take a lot of jobs, particularly job growth, to get that started. Usually, it's 10. In certain jurisdictions, it might be as much as 25, but it's normally not anything more than that. And as far as CapEx goes, one of the trigger points of opportunity can be something as simple as adding and improving what you've already planned on spending on a new improvement to a manufacturing line or an HVAC system, or things that you might already have in your capital plan. So 250,000, 500,000, something that's minimal. It does not require thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars to investment to start to tap into some of these benefits. And more and more jurisdictions from New Jersey to California to Texas to Florida are starting to really look at those regulations that have been a bit restrictive before the pandemic set in and started to relax those and to look at retention. Some programs even have the ability that if you're just not sure what the future is going to hold and you've got maybe 100 workers or 50 workers, you retain those folks, you still have a little bit of leeway. So maybe if you end up with 40 and not your 50, you still don't lose that benefit. You don't have to pay back a bunch of money or have something called clawbacks where the government's going to want their resources back. There's a ton of flexibility out there, but it's on a jurisdiction to jurisdiction basis. But just know every county, almost every city, large or small, there's opportunities outside of just what the federal government can offer.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jason. That's very helpful. Dave, I'd like to throw a question your way. I think it's very common, unless you happen to be making food-related products that are sold through the grocery or retail channel, that demand levels are at best volatile and at worst significantly lower than what we've been experiencing up until March. And if you can maybe use an example from one you've dealt with, or something from the past when that happens, can you walk us through what do you look at? Demand's down. What were the steps that you have taken or would take to preserve cash and survive for a better day?
Sure, be happy to. Look, I can give you a great example that I'm working with now, which is a consumer products company that originally had about $350 million of revenue. It's now down to $150 million of revenue. So significant declines because consumer products companies, they're shut down. Retail, it does about 90% of its sales to retail. Very few retail customers open, so sales are moving online, but not fast enough. So the problem is obviously, how do you do that? One, you take costs out. Two, you cut product lines that aren't making any money. And three, you got to really resize the business and divide the business up into the blocks of product lines that you have, and what are your costs associated with that product line. So you want every product line to stand on its own. And what are your costs? What are your margins? And if your margins aren't good enough, how do you get better margins? Do you have to move to another factory that produces the consumer products? Do you have to work through how to get margins up? Do you have to increase pricing? What do? Do you get rid of customers that aren't making you any money, that were okay when you were doing well, but now you don't have the ability to subsidize that customer? So you got to think through all that. And then you got to think through your SG&A costs, your selling and general administrative costs, and how do you move those down with the business? And then the way I always look at it is, if revenue's going down like this, usually your costs go down at a staircase and you're always behind the curve. So how do you get ahead of the curve? And that's tough to do because you're always usually behind and you're trying to make changes on the fly and revenue keeps dropping and you're trying to figure that all out. A lot of it is pay attention to detail. A lot of it is you may not have the management team to do that. You may have a growth-oriented management team and probably a CFO that hasn't done this before. So you got to probably bring in extra help, or the PE firm has to step in to help them out. Or you got to bring in some consultants that can do this if you want to protect the management team. Or take the management team out. You can hire a growth-oriented management team when you get back to the growth side of the business. So there's lots of tools. You just have to be very flexible in how you use those tools and how you react to the situation.
So how might you balance and think about, cutting muscle versus cutting bone? For example, you've got your management team, you've got your SG&A, you're trying to get ahead of that curve in the reduction in demand. And you're going to have, you talk to that management team that, like you said, might be a growth-oriented management team, and you've got to cut people that they rely on. How do you help them think through that and get clarity?
I usually think through it by kind of throwing the org chart out the window. Let's whiteboard it. What do you need to get through this time frame? What are the boxes? that we need to make sure this business can run. And then what we'll do is we'll take all the people we have and we'll decide whether they have the skill sets to slot into the box that we need. If they don't, you probably need to take them out of the business and go find somebody who's got that ability. If they do, then slot them into that, give them their new priority list, give them what they need to work on, and change how they think. Because a lot of times when you're growing, you're willing to spend money, spend money, spend money. Now it's like, you can't spend any money. How do we get the job done? So it's a little bit of that. I tend to find that's probably an easier way to go about it than say, well, we got these 5 people in the department. Let's take out 2 people. I mean, you can do that, but it's a lot easier to find what do you need and do we have the skill sets to fulfill it? If we don't, let's go find the skill sets. There's plenty of bodies out there, especially after the last 4 weeks when we lost 22 million jobs. And there's people looking to leave because they're scared to death that their company's going to be next and may crash and burn around them. So there's lots of people who are looking today.
One of the things I've always remembered you saying too, Dave, is if you're thinking about firing somebody, just do it.
Yeah, it's already too late. It's already too. If you're thinking about firing somebody, it's too late. They should have been gone months ago.
Yeah, and so with that said, is that not to be cold about it, but in a time like this, then too, is that when you're reslotting your team to kind of the new demand level, and you recognize it might be temporary, one from the perspective of, sort of top grading or keeping the people that are really effective, and 2, balancing if you don't expect this to be a permanent drop, how does that affect your kind of the depth you go to? Yeah.
My take on it is, look, if you think it's a temporary thing and 6 months later you're going to be okay, furlough your people. Take them off the salary side, keep them on the benefit side, and say, look, I got to do this to protect the business. I want to bring you back. Before you take another job, just call me. But I can't do this. I got to protect the business, but we want to bring you back. We just don't have the volume to bring you back today. And, there's ways to do that. And then if they call you and say, hey, look, I got a job, then you got a decision to make. And you may make the decision, hey, look, I still can't bring this person back, or I'm going to bring him back, or live with that decision.
Right.
There's lots of different ways to do this, but I can safely say there's going to be there's always been lots of people, as I call it, on the beach who have great skill sets. You just have to go find them. And be flexible with them. If you find somebody in, it's a 3-hour plane ride away, maybe they don't have to move to you. Maybe you just fly them in every week. And you get a better person than you're ever going to find in your general area. But be flexible.
Sure. Focus on what's important.
That's true.
Yeah. Jason, I'm curious, as you kind of hear Dave talk about what goes through his mind, I think it's fair to say that it's a way that effective operating partners at different private equity firms will think. Are there, as you think through the incentives and the different, other services and that you work in, does anything come to mind that might support an executive going through that decision-making process?
Well, I think to David's point, and you as well, Tim, is that it's a difficult time, and key decisions need to be made fast. You can't linger. And to my point earlier about incentives, there's no difference with what's in front of us either. The ones that can go after assistance that's in front of them today will be able to get those monies to the door tomorrow or maybe the next day. And there are plenty of governments and other non-governmental entities that are out there that want to help and are ready to help. And realizing that just a few months ago, there was a different debate in this country about government aid and assistance, and that's changed dramatically. And there are lots of opportunities for companies that maybe have never extended or needed to extend out an invitation for government to participate in their business through a tax abatement or through cash grants or anything else. Those things are out there now, and they're important because that may be able to help you operate 6 months longer, or keep some of your staff, or or rebuild what's currently being affected by the pandemic. And then also a smaller financial burden, but something many companies we're talking to now are thinking about is that how do you defend your workplace from the pandemic moving forward? How do you harden those assets, your offices, your common spaces, your cafeterias, your places where people congregate? Where do you get the money for that? And how do you then dip into where you already have exhausted savings and some other things? So there are opportunities, especially on the local level, for there to tap into those funds as well. And part of what we do beyond just helping with government aid and assistance and credits and incentives is around labor analytics and location strategy. And part of what we're seeing today is the underpinning of what still existed, what still is going to exist in the future, and was with us just a few months ago, and that's this war on talent. There's still going to be a challenge with higher skill levels and the competition of those skills. And part of a decision-making process that David just mentioned, which is important, is that if you do have to let go or furlough some of your staff, and they're of a higher skill set, just remind them to let you know that if they do get snatched up, or if they want to move or migrate to a different city or whatever it is, just to communicate with you as a business leader, so that you don't lose that long-term legacy talent base that you've built for so long. And I think there's some important strategies along those lines, and of course, many people that are unemployed at the moment are getting some benefits from different government entities, and some of those benefits are really high over the short term. They're set to expire at the end of June, and that may be extended. And it's the same thing with governments in the UK and Australia and many places around the world. They're out there temporarily, but when that starts to run out, many organizations, including us, are still going to see, in our modeling, an uptick in unemployment and folks on the sidelines until things economically start to improve, and we do testing and some of those other aspects of the national debate of the pandemic. So there are opportunities there available today to help with even some of the soft costs of hardening your facility for health and safety.
Thank you. Good. Very, very
I'd
good.
also like to comment when Dave mentioned the whiteboarding process, and you're thinking through all the different scenarios on ways to keep the company afloat, or how to realign the different supply chain strategies that you're looking at. That's one of the areas that, from a best practices perspective, the PE firm should have somebody that understands incentives, or is at least laser focused on making sure their portfolio companies are focused on it and know what's available. And the clients that we're able to add the most benefit for, we're in the war room with them. We're having weekly calls. We're understanding where they are thinking about moving employees around, where they're spending CapEx. Hey, we're going to have to move this machine over here. We're going to then have to upgrade power at the facility. What can we do to offset that expense in additional power for that machine? There's going to be 20 jobs that come along with it, and help them figure out what markets have the best labor rates, what ways they can offset those spends. And sometimes the best answer is don't go anywhere. Figure out what you can do inside your four walls, and what investments need to be made for us to become more efficient. So first, let's figure out inside the four walls and not move. But then if that's not the answer, if that creates too much of a fixed cost base, what else can we do? And just spitballing with somebody like ourselves that understands these programs at a local, state, and federal level, to be able to then maybe throw in some additional layers that we could help with when it comes to labor and availability and cost, et cetera. So whiteboarding the major changes that you're looking to implement in your company is huge. But then on top of it, what else can you do to shore up those strategies?
Thanks, Mike. And Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot here in a minute and ask if you would, like Dave did, walk through a case study that might be relevant for what people are going through today. But first, I want to mention one thing to the attendees. We've now are getting some questions coming in. We're going to do our best to cover all of them during the session. feel free to use the chat function privately or throughout the whole group to send any other questions you might have. If we don't get to them in this, in the remaining time that we have for this live stream, we will address any questions that come in our follow-up emails and when we send out the link for the video. So thank you very much. Mike, could you talk us through a case study?
Well, I'll give you a couple quick ideas. We'll just say a quick hit real fast where PE firm calls and says, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this. We're wondering what opportunities may exist." And this is a live opportunity at the moment where they're shutting down a facility in a expensive market. Labor costs, real estate costs are high, taxes are high. Looking to relocate it to a more centralized region in the U.S. And in a matter of a few days, we're able to put together analysis to show that management team that, all right, here's the low, the medium, and the high probability. Here's what we can do from a cash. These are cash related events, and they'd have to spend about $5 million to invest in that facility to get it up. They do a small expansion as well. But at the end of the day, within a matter of 3 days, we provide a summary to them, and that summary was in the range of $10 to $20 million, of which about $8 million of that is cash over the first 2 to 3 years. And that cash is real, and that's going to offset the investment of relocating them. And then on top of it, the benefits that they get from a lower wage. And that's just something that we'll do to help companies analyze the opportunities that are there. So that's one that we're working on. But I think back to my best practices that I was talking about before, really working with companies and sticking on that same theme where we have a company that we're working with, and they just provide all their ideas and their thoughts. And that power example is real. Hey, we have to relocate this piece of equipment. Our capacity in this facility is way down, or our need for capacity is way down. Let's shift it to another location. And well, there's about a $500,000 grant to be able to offset some of the electrical improvements that they need to make, both the equipment, running the utility line. So, and then also on top of it, as Jason mentioned earlier, a reduction in their current rate, not energy brokerage. I'm talking pure, negotiation with the utility. And then as they're evaluating those different options, we're providing all the feedback live every week. They'll talk about one topic. The following week, we'll provide all the analysis for them. So there's a live interaction that they can use these numbers. And this is, because of our databases and what we have, they can use these numbers to help make decisions on what order they should be doing things, whether it's that investment in existing plants or relocation or consolidation.
One thing this makes me think of, Mike, is as I've talked to different sponsors over the last few weeks, there's sort of a couple of buckets that some portfolio companies are in. There's one bucket where they were really just smoking, they were on their path for the investment thesis, on time, things were going well, and now it could be like Dave suggested before, it's a 6-month blip, and we've got to do furloughs, and they're going to take good steps to preserve cash. There's another group, though, of portfolio companies that they already knew that there was opportunity to reach a higher level, to make corrections. They were already struggling in some ways, and this brings it to a head. The COVID situation itself is exacerbating it, but also giving them sort of an opportunity to go back and do it from a whiteboard standpoint. Those are the companies, to me, and I'm throwing this out for comment, that really need to think that they could benefit from what you just talked through.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones that at this point, their management teams have their sleeves rolled up. They've got a bunch of different strategies that they're ready to implement, and what can be done to help implement those strategies, and making sure that you've checked all the boxes. And if you haven't, there's easy ways to do it from the side of what our firm does, which obviously the location analysis, labor, and incentives. And then, but having that integrated team and the operating partners and management to help get that across the goal line.
Very good. Thank you very much. Dave Kryline, we got a question in here that I think a lot of companies are dealing with right now. And you started to touch on it, but I'd like to go a little deeper. That we have skilled workers, and Jason mentioned this too. There's a skilled work base. Our demand's low. We've got the safety precautions and the potential that we, if somebody in our plant gets test positive for COVID, we have to shut down for a cleaning session. But the basic question I asked is, how do we retain our skilled workforce? And they added another phrase that I think may not be possible, but let me throw it out there: without just paying for it, without just paying them to be idle, without losing money, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One, if you've treated your workforce fairly and, in the past, that's going to be helpful to get hopefully some loyalty from your workers. If you've been kind of that company that always is trying to squeeze your workers, they're probably not going to have a whole lot of loyalty. So you need to think through what you want to be. Maybe you've done the past and you don't have the loyalty. You got to think through that going forward. But the best thing I can do is, if you want to retain those skill sets, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for those skill sets. That could be furloughing them and giving them benefits. If you let them go, say, I want you to come back. I think this is a 3-month thing. How do I get you back in 3 months? If you come back, I'm going to give you a bonus. I'm making a number up because I don't know how much you're getting paid. I'll give you $2,500 if you come back in 3 months. So don't take another job. I can cover you for this, and we'll pay out your vacation and all that kind of stuff. So the other thing is, put them on a reduced salary. If you really need to retain them, give them a stipend every month to help them through this period, and hopefully they'll feel better about it. But lots of different ways. You just got to kind of think through it. And I don't think you can do that with everybody. Now, I'd be cautious about doing it with some people and not others, because if it leaks out, that's going to cause other issues for you.
Right.
You just got to be flexible in all these situations.
Absolutely. A couple of things that come to my mind too that we've seen a couple clients do is, certainly the furlough, but another one that kind of fits in with the risk of if someone tests positive, the people that were working with them have to quarantine for a couple of weeks. So one option is to actually sort of create a couple of shifts or staggered shifts where you can keep a group of people working, and essentially you have an A team and a B team. Not in terms of who's better and worse, but just you've got a group working on this shift, another group working on that shift, or they stagger. One's working this week and off, the other one's off this week, and that way, if you ever do have the situation that someone tests positive, God forbid, that you have to be down for 2-3 days to clean. But then you still have a workforce that could repopulate the plant after that.
Yeah, the other thing to do is think about it. If you're I'll use a manufacturing environment, most people, except for material handlers, are not moving around the facility that much. So take them in groups and schedule bathroom breaks. So maybe you only have to shut down part of the facility if you've got somebody that comes in with COVID, because they only hit that one section, and they're not meeting with everybody in the break room. You got different times for breaks. You got different times for lunches. You got different bathroom breaks. You got different things like that don't infect the whole facility. They only take up a part of your facility.
Yes, that makes good sense. Another one related to that too is the idea of having skilled workers do unskilled jobs.
There's that too.
Yeah. One of the first things I heard talking to a friend was that he knows a lady who's a senior vice president at an airline. She is now cleaning planes.
There's not a whole planes in the air, but that's a good take your unskilled workers that you can hire back, because there's going to be plenty of those out there, and keep your skilled workers as much as you can. I mean, have them do something. Train them up on different things to drive a fork truck or something if they're running a machine, or what else can they do to kind of get paid, because you want to retain their skill sets when you come back.
Exactly. Yeah. Another similar question that came through, and before we move on to Jason and Mike, from your perspective on what you've seen, any other ideas about, maintaining your skilled work base, especially during this time?
Well, I think so. We're already seeing some of this being implemented in other parts of the world. So in Singapore, you had staggered attendance by design. A third of the office appears there in the office every week, and you go into a cycle, and there's temperature tests when you first come in, and all those things have already been implemented. We're seeing some of the benefit of it. In addition, there are some manufacturing operations that are deemed essential in different jurisdictions that are having mandatory hand washing once an hour, and doing the kind of shift work but smaller groupings that David, you had mentioned in regards to material handlers and some of the other positions that don't move around a lot, and that there is an opportunity for there to be a small cluster of transmission. So, and then there's a lot of design implementations that are already there and innovations around workplace bacteria-related finishes and other things that are being implemented in the workplace itself that could potentially be a factor. And then on top of all this, this is the greatest experiment in the history of humanity, with people working from home and being virtual. Over 80% of the Chinese working economy is working from home from an office perspective up until recently. And China is a place where hadn't really embraced virtual working like this over Zoom that we're speaking on today. So there's going to be a lot of companies that will say, all right, well, I need to take my workplace that I have now, this workspace, separate people, get the right kind of social distancing, maybe have people sporadically come, put one-way directional, put some other plastics and materials that help create distance. But that really the majority of the workforce will stay at home in different ways. And many workers have thought that that's a positive thing. And now they've started to settle into the closets that they're stuck in, or the spaces that they can lock.
Right.
They've got kids at home. Whatever it is, that has been noticed by many of the corporates that we represent and the private equity companies that are holding them, as a way to hopefully de-risk the situation. Because I think what a lot of companies are worried about at the moment is what happens when there's another wave. And there will be another wave, and there could be more. There's going to be hotspots that are going to happen. Until we can eradicate this disease, that's going to happen. So how do we then take our workplaces, but also, it took a while for us to get from normal life to a shelter-in-place life. It took a few weeks, if not months in certain instances. That's not going to be the case. If Dayton, Ohio has a hotspot, that city is going to go from 0 to shelter-in-place within a day or two, if not sooner. So then how do we operate and create something that we're doing a lot of analysis on? We did it before based on skills, but now we're doing it because of the pandemic, and that's concentration and density risk. Not just in your operation and your single site of manufacturing or office, but where can you diversify further, so that if to everyone's point so far during this meeting is how do you shut down for a little bit and clean, but you can still make your product or service your customers or do what you're doing in another jurisdiction that's not affected. And that's because so much of the economy has been drastically affected by the pandemic in New York and Chicago and in Detroit and LA and other places. How do you diversify further away from like New York City? Many companies have invested in New York City. That might not be the best place from a dense and density and a concentration risk in the future in this region. So how do you create redundancy in areas that you haven't looked before? And that's part of a lot of these concentration risk assessments that we're doing a lot of at the moment to try to help companies just start the planning process.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jason. Another question that came in, and Dave, I'll start with you again on this if we can, is the thought behind and how do you think through when to build ahead? Perhaps building inventories of your A items, things you know you're going to sell. I'm interpreting, but how much would you do to pull in orders and forecasted demand?
Look, I'm okay with that as long as you're not going to build too much inventory, because depending on how you're financing the business, if you're financing it through an ABL facility and you're building finished goods and you get 50 cents on the dollar, that means for financing, that means 50 cents of the dollar is coming out of your cash flow. So I'd be thoughtful about it. I'm not against it. I'd only do it on product you know you're going to sell. And I would also do it if you're worried about your workforce, that you got taking too many people out, have them slowly reduce hours and build some extra inventory if that'll help. But I'd be doing it extremely gently.
Yes. One, you made me think of another topic that I think is a very important consideration. And that is, I remember doing a tour just a month ago, or a month and a half ago before all this happened. And I asked the CEO, I commented that everybody was busy and this was a sort of a job shop. And I'm like, why do you think that is? And he goes, well, it's a great culture and people will go from one job to another. They'll help out when they finish their work. It's an assembly operation. And I said, that's actually could be a little troubling. And he's like, well, why is that? And I said, because I actually want to see people idle at times. That tells me that our, tack time, our pace, our work balance is not aligned. And we've got people that are not working at the same speed. When I can't tell when something's out of alignment, then we never know. People are just always busy. And I think what that makes me think about here is the importance of not allowing the company to work, or the lines to work with more people than absolutely necessary.
I totally agree, because you don't know what your cost structure is then for that line.
And it's a horrible muscle memory.
Right.
It's like in a warehouse space abhors a vacuum. I think in a plant, it also will abhor people, not working, not being idle. So be okay with it. If you're going to keep people on when you don't have a specific need for them, have them do maintenance work, have them stay home, have them, do something, but do not put 10 people on a line that needs 8. Never. That's one thing, just never to do, for a number of reasons.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Good.
Yeah, we've been encouraging folks to take vacation, and it's strange because you can't go anywhere. So it's not your typical vacation, but we've said take some PTO, take some vacation, because you just need to. My oldest daughter in her school uses the term brain break, and you need that, and it's hard because you don't get to go to a beach or go outside much or do the things that you normally would do, but you still need that break, and it's so important.
It's a great point.
Staycations. All beaches are open in Jacksonville. Don't go anywhere else in Florida.
And I think Home Depot and Menards are doing a pretty good business right now with people doing their do-it-yourself projects. Keep busy at home. Another question that came in is, I think it's a great question, especially as we think about fundamental changes, like changing our infrastructure, our fixed cost structure, perhaps consolidating during this period of uncertainty. So right now, whatever's going on in the company, there's also a lot more uncertainty. What's it going to look like in a month, 2 months, and a year from now? How does that impact our thought process on what's the right footprint, or what's the right number of people I want to have remaining on my roster? Maybe Jason, I'll throw that out to you first if you don't mind.
Well, Well, thanks, Tim. And what's fascinating is that just a few weeks ago, we were working on assignments that were to help companies diversify away from certain markets like China, having nothing to do with the pandemic, because of trade and things that are, again, just like the war on talent, these trade tariffs are still in place. They're still there. And so there's going to have to be some sea change ahead. But one of those big things that we're already seeing now into the pandemic is a very, very deep-rooted interest in diversifying and some of that diversification coming back to North America. And because NAFTA 2.0 is in place now, and it creates a great opportunity between Mexico and the U.S. and Canada to maybe diversify some manufacturing or maybe some kind of value-add assembly that could take place here on this side of the world. There's a lot of companies interested in that. Those things don't happen overnight. But when you look at those 3 to 4 to 5 years strategic vision and opportunities, those are going to be some interest, and not already being discussed and incentivized by certain governments. The country of Japan created billions of dollars worth of incentives to try to get Japanese companies not to invest, to divest from China. They don't have to go to Japan; they can go anywhere. But it's those kind of environments are going to exist for a long time. And there's going to be many companies really looking at their supply chain, looking at opportunities to divest from maybe economies that they've been too integrated into that part of that part of their supply chain where in the future it won't be applicable anymore. To be closer to your markets, to be closer to some of your raw materials is going to be more important. Because if someone 3 months ago, if we would have said, all right, the first top factors in our location strategy is cost, access to labor, and pandemics, they would have thrown us out of the room. But today that's going to be a big focus, is how do I de-risk my supply chain and my manufacturing footprint based on what could happen in the future, where one country goes down, can't produce, where am I going to find my goods and my materials and that whole supply?
Yeah, that's one thing I think that has maybe a silver lining with the trade war that started maybe a year and a half ago, is that companies have been thinking about de-risking for that entire period of time and have started down that path. And I think here's part of the reality: China is very good at what they do, and many of us were lulled, and became reliant on them. And it does take real work to move capacity from China to almost anywhere else in the world. Dave, how has that been addressed with the companies you've been involved in?
Well, we got lots of manufacturing in China for our consumer products company, and we are trying to move out as quickly as we possibly can just due to the tariffs. But if you're a manufacturer and you're getting something from China, I would always highly recommend that if you've got another substitute in another country, go to your customers who are risk averse and say, look, I can give you this product and I've got a long supply chain and it's going to cost you X. Or I can give you this product, which is going to be the exact same thing with a shorter supply chain and the cost is going to be Y. Which one do you want? And let them choose.
Exactly. Yeah, that I think they're certainly, for the last year or so, they've probably been more open to that conversation than they were before.
It used to be just low cost. Now it's, I want to be able to get product also. And that becomes even more important in this pandemic environment.
Another question came in from another private equity firm that asked, are companies planning on stepwise recoveries in terms of people returning to work and customer volumes? And I think, so the way I'm reading this question is, do you expect it to just reopen and you're going to repopulate your plant to its full, or do you expect to have more of a step function ramp up over time?
Step function for me.
Tell us more.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, to me, it's just a step function because I don't know what states are coming in, what states are going out. I don't know where demand's going to be. I can see with, look, it took us 10 years to put 20 million new jobs into place, and it took us 4 weeks to lose 22 million jobs.
Right.
So my philosophy is there's going to be pretty much of a deep recession here, and you don't know where your revenues are going to be. And I don't think you know where, you could have blips in revenues and they go up and down depending on how demand goes. So I just don't think you know where, nothing's stable right now. And until it becomes stable, I think you should be planning on how to be as flexible as you can through this process.
Amen. Mike?
Tim, actually, I'd like to throw, I know you're asking the questions, but I'd like to throw that back at you. You're in the trenches a lot. You're talking to a lot of these companies, and part of what you do is helping answer those questions. So I guess I'd like to hear from you and your thoughts.
So, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. And, from a principle standpoint, it starts with the expectation, the forecast, and, Dave mentioned this, if you're going to build ahead and kind of develop your supply plan in the company, it's really focusing on the A items and the things we know we're going to sell. And then using some of these tactics that we've talked about to, first you have to stabilize at this new level. And Dave, I think, described a lot of that. It can sound cold, that we need to understand what do we absolutely need to run this and serve the existing customers we have today and to survive at that level. And certainly then you take into account skilled workers that we really put a premium on, and working at that level to stabilize. Because at the end of the day, it's like the old Mark Twain quote, 80% of success is surviving. It's showing up. And so the key right now is to be aggressive and to really think through it. And this is one of the areas that I always find fascinating. We titled this Rebalancing Your Plant and Rebalancing Your Supply Chain. And I love watching our teams work through this when you've got your new demand or got some base level demands, and in a sense, reverse engineering what you need in the plant to fill that demand and to balance the workload to that. It's a very good technical product, and it's a project. It's a great way to really get a data-based, evidence-based, calculated, thoughtful approach to a very difficult situation. And in general, I think when you have especially distasteful, hard things to do, like letting people go, furloughing them, slowing down the plant, if you can do it on a data-based, evidence-based approach, it's much more understandable, and you're not just the bad guy who's being harsh. That's the start of how we're looking at it right now.
I thought I'd throw this out there. My wife works for a private equity-owned business right now, and I thought that they handled their situation of furloughing their employees very well. And they initially came to them and offered a voluntary furlough, and if you elected to go on furlough, you got your bonus, as Dave mentioned. So when you come back, you get 2 weeks of pay as your bonus for coming back. But it felt like it gave the employees a little bit more control of the situation. And shockingly, almost everybody took the furlough voluntarily. They were making more money going on furlough than they were actually staying at the office, which created a whole nother set of problems for the people that were working. That, hey, wait a minute, voluntary furlough, they're getting paid more money than what I am, and I'm here. So it also can create some additional problems. But at the end of the day, those people still have a job. They know that. So my wife still has her job, and the people there have a little bit more of a safety net than the people there on furlough, because God only knows if they're actually going to be able to come back and if the business will be strong enough. But it gave those employees a sense of choice.
Sure.
So I thought it was pretty neat.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good high point and thoughtful add to wrap up this discussion on. We're at the end of our hour, and I would like to thank Dave, Jason, and Mike for joining me for this time. There's a few more questions that were asked we did not get to. We will provide thoughts on those, as well as the link to get the video of this live stream broadcast. Thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
Be good.